Good afternoon, good evening. Hello and welcome everyone to this live town hall with Executive Director David C. Howse. My name is Kevin Becerra and I use the pronouns he, him, his. I'm one of the creative producers in the artistic engagement team here at ArtsEmerson, and I'll be helping moderate this conversation along with Jess Meyer, who is part of our guest experience team. The conversation will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so those of you who are not able to join us live or who are watching the recording, welcome. Glad you found it. That being said, we'd love for you that are with us in the Zoom room here to keep your cameras on, but if you'd prefer not to be recorded, feel free to turn your cameras off. We also ask that you keep your microphones muted and unmute when you're invited to do so. The mute and unmute buttons can be found, as well as the video buttons, can be found in the bottom left corner of your Zoom window. If you have a question or a comment, please message either me or Jess directly in the Zoom chat to be added to the queue. The chat button is located at the bottom of the Zoom window. If you don't wish to ask your question on camera, please let us know and I will read it for you. Of course, if you have any other questions or comments, feel free to message us. We're here to help. Also, for the best viewing experience, we recommend using Speaker View, which can be found in the upper right-hand corner of the Zoom window. I also wanted to thank and acknowledge our ASL interpreter, Jerron Gilchrist, and our captioners, Mary Walker and Kate Lur, for being here and in aiding in this event. And without further ado, here is David Howse.
Thank you, Kevin. It's good to see those that I can see, and I offer my thanks as well to Jerron and all those who are behind the scenes helping us make this town hall possible. I want to begin by acknowledging that ArtsEmerson resides on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Massachusetts people, whose name was appropriated by this Commonwealth and on whom violence is perpetrated in the name of this country. We pay respect to the Massachusetts elders, past, present, and future, the traditional custodians of these lands, and we commit to uncovering that truth. I personally am calling in from the Massachusetts people alongside the waters of the Neponset, currently known as Milton, Massachusetts. So please use the next few silent moments to consider the traditional custodians of the land on which you sit. Thank you. I want to again welcome everybody. This is another town hall where we're together to share a little bit stories, but today I'm pleased and quite honored to be spending the next hour with you, but also with someone who is no stranger to most of us, very close to us, in fact, and to many of you, and that is KOA. As I say, KOA is no stranger to ArtsEmerson, to the Emerson College campus, to the city, and to so many of our audience members. And while he needs no introduction, it's such an impressive sort of history and story that I thought I would share a few opening thoughts and biographical remarks about KOA. So KOA, the artist formerly known as Daniel Beaty, is a visionary actor, singer, writer, and social entrepreneur who lives at the intersection of art, spirit, and social change. Raised in Dayton, Ohio, in a set of complicated circumstances involving, drugs and incarceration amongst family members, KOA learned early on that the arts can help heal trauma, transform pain into power, and inspire new generation of change makers to dismantle the systemic racism and oppression at the core of the challenges that KOA and so many Americans face. KOA's life's work shares both the truth of who we are as a people and his hope for a better world. And he believes that these stories have the power to move us and inspire us as individuals and as society to transform ourselves and the world, to confront our pain and imagine a better world, and to work together to achieve it. He's developed an award-winning body of work that includes his plays Through the Night, Emergency, Mr. Joy, The Tallest Tree in the Forest, Paul Robeson. These works have been performed at venues ranging from maximum security prisons to the Public Theater, Lincoln Center, the White House, and of course, here at ArtsEmerson, where KOA's plays have been presented more than any other living playwright. Emergency was in 2013, Breath and Imagination in early 2015, and Mr. Joy in late 2015 at the Paramount Center. And we've toured Mr. Joy throughout Boston's neighborhoods and to the suburbs ever since we started back in 2017. So when we talk about long arc relationships, KOA is a perfect example of what we mean by that. And not to mention the time that we spent developing a project that KOA brought to us called I Dream Boston. Some of you were participants in that as well. So there's been a very long arc to our relationship. He's garnered many awards, from Obie Awards to multiple NAACP Theater Awards. He's definitely in great demand, and still KOA continues to develop work that confronts, heals, and nurtures us all. I had the privilege of learning about KOA very early on when I came here, and I guess it was 2015. It was, at the time, it was, you got to meet Daniel Beaty. Daniel Beaty this. I'm like, no, who is this man that we're calling Daniel Beaty? And I have my colleague David Dower, who's online with us today, to thank for making that that introduction. It's been really a pleasure to get to know KOA and to get to know his work. We've traveled together. KOA, you'll remember that trip down to Martha's Vineyard with Claudia Rankin and Toshi Reagan and what we put you through, but you've been a trooper, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon. So thank you for being here, KOA.
Thank you for having me, David.
So we've got a little time together, and I'm hoping we're just going to have a friendly conversation with a few spectators in our midst, but to talk a little about how you're doing, and to talk a little about what you've been working on and thinking about, and then to pivot a little bit to a very exciting project that is in development, and we'll sort of end there. And of course, we'll open it up for question and answers as we go through. Just to say, we're pretty informal in these town halls, so if you have a burning question at some point, feel free to, we can engage them as we go. You don't have to wait until the very end. So with that, I will jump right in. I'll just start to say, this has been an unimaginable year of challenges on all fronts. The pandemic, the listing, the racial reckoning that continues to disrupt and disturb us, on every day. There's been loss, there's been pain. And I know that you've also experienced some family loss, but I'm just wondering, Cole, like, how are you? How are you hanging in there? How are you managing?
Right. So let me just first say thank you, David, for this time, and to the entire ArtsEmerson community. ArtsEmerson is truly my theatrical home, and I have a lot of love for the institution and for Boston, and for the continual advocacy and support that you all offer me. So it's really a pleasure to reconnect with everyone. This has been a crazy past year, as
at least.
I feel everyone can attest to. And, I'm not presently in a relationship, so I've gone through this year of COVID, and I was living by myself in Hollywood. I've gone through this year, physically largely by myself up until the past months that I'll share about, but it's been a tremendously transformative time in my life, as I know it's been in many people's lives. And the answer of how I am is that I'm in a moment where I am really asking myself, how have I changed as an artist, as a human being, over this time, and where is my contribution at this point, and for me, one of the things I always say as an artist is that purpose is the bridge past ego. And by ego, I don't just mean moments of arrogance, but also moments of insecurity or self-doubt. And while this time has been deeply introspective, I have always found that my lifeline, or my path towards activating myself in the healthiest, most dynamic ways, is to remember purpose, and to really ask myself, what is it that I can offer? And I find with my personal journey, with the traumas that I've encountered in my growing and my becoming, that I think everyone has their version of, and then we've experienced collectively as a world, and certainly as a nation. The moment I begin to ask myself, what can I contribute? I'm at an assets thinking space versus a deficit thinking space. So the deepest and most authentic answer is that I am in exploration of what my assets are and what I can contribute in this moment that's been a whirlwind.
Yeah. Well, it's very refreshing, given all that you've offered, to continue to be asking yourself, what more do I have to give, is encouraging, inspiring, and gives us all something to think about. This notion of purpose being the bridged past ego is something that we can all kind of lean into. So, you know, you look good, you look healthy, you look well, you've made changes. You know, I know that in this year it's been all about changes, right? So we're on the West Coast in Hollywood. You've traveled a bit. You're now like landed on the East Coast. You know, you've been dabbling in all kinds of different, not dabbling, but really conquering all kinds of different forms. You know, from TV to, so changes there. And there's also a big change that, you know, is for all of us and for you in particular, and that's your name, KOA. Like, I'd love for you to tell me, like, that journey of becoming KOA, if that's
right. If I were to tell you the full journey would take all of our time, but I'm gonna definitely give you
the snippet. But, you know, the truth is, we're not going to have enough time. I already know right now we're not going to have enough time for conversation, but I'm so curious about
no,
that.
it's a pleasure to share, and you actually really teed it up perfectly. So right after Ahmaud Arbery's murder, before George Floyd, I started working I've been writing and producing television, as well as my theatrical work and other projects that I work on. And I was in a writer's room for a leading show on a major network, which I won't name. And everyone was figuring out the world with Zoom. And so we were doing very long sessions on Zoom, 50, 60-hour sessions it got to, because I was one of the higher level producers, so we had extra time. And then the murder of George Floyd happened. And as is the case too often in spaces, I was the only mid to upper level person of color in the room, and only virtual room, and only Black male, and only one of two Black people. Of about 17 to 20 people would be there. And it became sort of my job to process sort of my own feelings around what was happening, but because we were also endeavoring to look at the state of our country in the material, to try to communicate about it in this group. And it was very intense. And then at the same time, I had a place right on the corner, about a block from Hollywood and Vine. And I don't know if you all know, but the major protests for George Floyd happened in that area, in the Hollywood area. And so at one point, I could see from my balcony a military tank with soldiers. On the other side, 20 soldiers with rifles, and then helicopters. I counted at one point 10, and thousands of people marching through the streets, and sirens and all of that. And in that moment, I had such a visceral understanding of the emotional chaos that so many of us were feeling. And that led me into a space of deep introspection. You know, again, for full transparency, it wasn't an easy moment by any means in my life. But I really began to ask myself, for my own experience, what is the root of this? You know, what is the root of this personal experience I'm having with the unhealed legacy of race in this country? And I had learned some time ago the name of my great-great-grandmother, who his name is Lucinda Carson. Her slave name was Lucinda Carson. And I made the decision that I was going to do a sojourn to the plantation in North Carolina, where she was enslaved in the 1800s, really the late 1700s into the 1800s. And I made the decision as an artist, again, trying to use my tools. Well, a narrative I use, one of my books is called Transforming Pain to Power, that I wanted to actually take the earth that my great-great-grandmother had tilled, and do poetry and song and dance and transform that, and to invite my family that, as you shared in the intro, has inherited various forms of the brokenness and the trauma that's happened in this country. So I went in the midst of the pandemic around November to North Carolina, and there's now a museum there. And I was met on the porch because I told them I was coming. I asked them if I could do a performance there. My family was coming. And I was met on the porch by an 88-year-old man, white man named Dr. Haney. And he had on a mask, and he said to me, Mr. Beaty, I was the chairman here of Carson Plantation for 10 years. When I learned that you were coming, I came out of retirement to meet you. I looked about who you were online. I noticed you also went to Yale. He had a PhD from Yale. And he says, we've kept a detailed record of the 64 Negroes who were enslaved at Carson Plantation, and your great-great-grandmother, Lucinda Carson, was a legend here. And I said, okay. And then he proceeded to hand me this book. And in the last page of the book, it's called Aunt Lucinda's Shroud. And it's a writing about my great-great-grandmother, who lived to be over 100 years old, who had a shroud that she had somehow managed to keep with her, and that she was the daughter of a king in her native country. And that when the Yankees came and raided Carson Plantation, they ripped this shroud off of my great-great-grandmother's body, put it on, danced around in it in the horror to the other Negroes there, and carried Aunt Lucinda's royal shroud away. And he proceeded to show me a plaque on an outdoor eating area where she had lived and, had, camp meetings and all the things that they did there in the grounds. And even some of my relatives that came after her, who were some of the first Black people in that area to learn to read. And, it was just a really profound experience. And so I did some research to figure out what region my great-great-grandmother would have come from. And we were able to connect it to Ghana, to the Jamestown region and to the Ga tribe. And I connected online with the Queen Mother of the Ga tribe, wow, who acknowledged my great-great-grandmother's story. And I was given an invitation to return to Ghana in West Africa. And during the pandemic, everyone thought that I was crazy to do so. But this has been a time of tremendous transition and becoming and evolution. And it felt right to return my great-great-grandmother's spirit in the form of my body. So I traveled in December to Accra, Ghana. I was met there by the Paramount King of the Ga tribe, and the chiefs and elders and the Queen Mothers of that region. And they did a series of ceremonies. The first was a ceremony to return and bury my great-great-grandmother's spirit so that she could sit amongst the ancestors. Then they did a naming ceremony for me, which is part of my name change. And then they did an instooling ceremony, which is the process of instooling me as a chief or a king. They use both words interchangeably in honor of my great-great-grandmother's legacy.
Wow. And that's how we come to KOA.
Yes, we come to KOA from that experience. And also, you know, I really have been on a journey, you know, in my artistic exploration, but in my personal exploration to be the author of my own story.
Mm.
And, you know, we all inherit what we inherit from our family experiences, from the traumas that happen in life. And, you know, what we know about how the brain works, you know, trauma in particular, childhood trauma infects, infects is an interesting word, you know, it also affects, you know, how the brain processes and how it works. But the thing that I think is remarkable about the human spirit is that is the power of choice. And what is remarkable about any of us, regardless of what happens in our lives that is difficult or challenging, is the power to choose. And then what I think artists particularly can do is help us see, help us imagine, create worlds, expand concepts. And so also it was a reclamation of self.
Yep.
It was a decision that I'm not my pain. I'm not the things that have happened to me. I'm not the legacy of slavery in this country. I'm not royalty raped and pillaged and denied. That we're all, if we choose to see it and know it, royal, divine, however we want to express that core essence that is who I believe we all are, that is eternal, unlimited, divine.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear this story because it's actually a manifestation of exactly the things that you've taught us around moving from pain to power. But yours is a real moving from pain to power of your great-great-grandmother Lucinda Carson on that plantation into the power of royalty, you know, in,
Yes,
in Ghana.
absolutely.
What I mean, that in itself is a story. I mean, that is the story that's being told. I'm curious, Koa, as we move into talking about sort of what you're working on now, how has this journey, which has been both spiritual, ancestral, all kinds of a personal journey, how has that, or maybe it's too early to know, shaped, changed your story, your writing, sort of the stories that you want to tell and how you want to tell them?
Yeah, I'm working on a novel about my experience with my great grandmother. That's part of what I'm working on. It looks like it wants to be a novel right now, and right now I'm calling it Queen Akwaba. And in Ghana, Akwaba is your welcome, but just like a welcome home, welcome home. And I have a line that I have given to my great grandmother as her narration. She says, "I whispered a prayer through the centuries that my seed might be free." So in 1816 is close to the time that she is the time she was captured, and it's been, my family's not kept this story, has not known this story, but somehow I was able to feel the impulse, feel the need to reconnect. And so I've always had a sense of urgency around freedom, this idea of freedom and how I can be more free, how we as humanity can be more free. But the way it's really changed me most is that um, I'm insistent upon my personal journey for freedom because I am the embodiment of my ancestors' sacrifice.
Mm.
And so for me to be free is a redemption of
Mm.
all that was taken. And so it's just in the midst of a time where many of us have had reasons to not have hope. Um, it's made me insistent to fight for my own sense of hope,
Mhm.
um, and to continue to believe that it's possible.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it'll be. Um, I'm excited to see what comes from KOA. We know that the spirit, the energy, the ownership, the power that was Daniel Beaty is even deeper in KOA. And I'm really excited about what develops, and just thrilled for you that you are in this place. When so many are struggling for that freedom in all kinds of ways, and to find inspiration in others who are close to us, it's really inspiring. And I wanna, my script says now talk about the art, but this is the art. Like all that
right.
we're talking about is the art, and I'm really wanted to talk about sort of the body of work that we've engaged with. We talk about it as the trilogy, and you're working on a new piece that's being developed in this new space. Everyone knows that KOA has been a resident artist with us technically since 2013. And begun the work on the third and final chapter of the trilogy of solo works that we commissioned. And that work has been commissioned, this particular new piece, through the generosity of Mary and Ted Window. I'm not sure if they're here today, but we're thrilled to be able to continue this story. And just to kind of get us started, I'd love to share a clip of one of the pieces that's probably been viewed millions of times. We'll talk about it later, just to get us into this conversation around the trilogy, where we've been, and then where you're going to be taking us in this next piece. So we're going to watch a clip that's maybe familiar to most of you, called Knock Knock.
As a boy, I shared a game with my father. Played it every morning till I was 3. He would knock on my door, and I'd pretend to be asleep till he got right next to the bed. Then I would get up and jump into his arms. "Good morning, Papa." And my papa, he would tell me that he loved me. We shared a game, knock knock, until that day when the knock never came. And my mama takes me on a ride past cornfields on this never-ending highway till we reach a place of high, rusty gates. A confused little boy, I enter the building carried in my mama's arms. Knock knock. We reach a room of windows and brown faces. Behind one of the windows sits my father. I jump out of my mama's arms and run joyously towards my papa's, only to be confronted by this window. I knock knock, trying to break through the glass, trying to get to my father. I knock knock as my mama pulls me away before my papa even says a word. And for years he has never said a word, and so 25 years later I write these words for the little boy in me who still awaits his papa's knock. "Papa, come home, 'cause I miss you. Miss you waking me up in the morning and telling me you love me. Papa, come home, 'cause there's things I don't know, and I thought maybe you could teach me how to shave, how to dribble a ball, how to talk to a lady, how to walk like a man. Papa, come home, 'cause I decided a while back I want to be just like you, but I'm forgetting who you are." And 25 years later, a little boy cries, and so I write these words and try to heal and try to father myself, and I dream up a father who says the words my father did not. "Dear son, I'm sorry I never came home. For every lesson I failed to teach, hear these words. Shave in one direction with strong, deliberate strokes to avoid irritation. Dribble the page with the brilliance of your ballpoint pen. Walk like a god, and your goddess will come to you. No longer will I be there to knock on your door, so you must learn to knock for yourself. Knock, knock down doors of racism and poverty that I could not. Knock, knock on doors of opportunity for the lost brilliance of the black men who crowd these cells. Knock, knock with diligence for the sake of your children. Knock, knock for me, for as long as you are free, these prison gates cannot contain my spirit. The best of me still lives in you. Knock, knock with the knowledge that you are my son, but you are not my choices. Yes, we are our father's sons and daughters, but we are not their choices. But despite their absences, we are still here, still alive, still breathing, with the power to change this world, one little boy and girl at a time. Knock, knock, who's there? We are.
I have watched it 1,000 times, as have many other people. Really, millions have viewed this on YouTube and other clips that have gone around the world, but very few know it's from Emergency, which is the first story in that trilogy, right? But I'm curious, when you set out on Emergency, did you know it was going to be part of a trilogy? Tell us a little bit about that, and then tell us about Emergency.
Yes, absolutely. This is the first time hearing that poem since my father's passing.
Wow.
Which I just want to acknowledge. My father made his transition about 3 weeks ago, and we just had his memorial this past week. And so, it's interesting. That I did not know that Emergency was going to be a trilogy, but I did know that I was beginning to scratch the surface on something that was going to matter to me for my entire career, which is how do we become more free, and how do we unearth the unhealed legacy of slavery in this country and its impact on us. And so Emergency imagines a slave ship that rises in front of the Statue of Liberty in present day New York City. And it's sent by an ancestor, and the ship is called Remembrance. And the metaphor for me was, very intentional, which is, what is our greatest symbol of freedom in this country, which is Statue of Liberty, and what is a symbol of our greatest bondage, as a nation, and this was the slave ship. So the slave ship in front of the Statue of Liberty asked the question, what stands in front of our freedom? And and then each of the characters, and I played 43 different characters at one point in the show, is dealing with their own exploration of how to know themselves as free, how to be more free. And so that is really the story of the piece. And in this poem, Knock Knock, as part of my bio, and one of the things that I explore as a writer is what I call the internal antagonist. You know what I mean? Because particularly as a Black person, as a Black sane gender loving person in this country, as I could put all the other descriptors, there are all these systemic challenges, and one can feel overwhelmed trying to wrestle with the magnitude of the systemic challenges, though we must. And I think the opportunity that I found is where is my own power? Where is my own ability to know my freedom, to see myself as free, to choose freedom. And that Knock Knock, poem, that was what I call my initial breakdown, which was, I was raised by this loving, charismatic father, who was there waking me up every morning till I was 3, and then was not there because of incarceration and choices he made. And in my process of grieving my father's passing, my mother said something to me very recently. She says, I never wanted to say this to you. She says, but I feel like I have to say it now. She says, your father's challenge with addiction is that he was such a brilliant Black man, and he saw the world so clearly, and he was not able to reconcile for himself his capacity with the injustice of this world and his ability to see it so clearly. Yeah. And I think that this choice of freedom for me is the ability to reconcile. I don't know how one reconciles injustice, but the ability to come to a place of inner groundedness, inner centeredness, ability to be well in all the ways wellness can mean in the midst of a world that is so violent and has such assaults and such injustice, particularly when you embody so many of the things that people assault. Yeah,
it's really interesting to hear you talk about those pieces, sort of that the lessons from your mother, the lessons from your father, but it's also so curious to hear Knock Knock so many years ago talking about walking like kings and queens, and again that being the present day. And the story about your father is the story of so many Black men, women, people who've been oppressed, who have such potential that's often suffocated, squashed, taken out because of the world that we lived in. And you've gone to writing, right? You chose writing as a path, which again is a tool that we, going back to I Dream and others of writing that past, and engaging that. And, you also mentioned, as you were talking about, you paid something like 43 characters in Emergency. And I want to talk a little bit about what that is, but actually let's take a look at the opening of Emergency just to get a sense of what that looks like. We've seen it a little bit in Mr. Joy, but like 43 characters, I mean, what were you thinking? But let's take a look.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this breaking news report. A slave ship has just risen out of the Hudson River in front of the Statue of Liberty. That's right, you heard me. A slave ship has just risen out of the Hudson River in front of the Statue of Liberty. People across Manhattan are leaving their homes and jobs to witness what many are calling some deep stuff. I was laying here trying to get me some sleep when out of nowhere I hear this loud rush of water and see this harsh, blinding light. It made me close my eyes real tight. Then when I open them again, there's this big, huge ship standing right here in front of the Statue of Liberty, all old and worn down looking. Slaveologists are busy trying to figure it out. Yes, emotions are high as people from all walks of life pour into Liberty Island. One group, calling themselves PON, pissed off Negroes, have brought tents and rifles and vow to shoot anybody who try to move this ship. What? Yes. Let's get some more live, on-the-spot feedback from the crowd gathering here at Liberty Island. Slave ship. I thought this was the new Carnival cruise. When I first saw the slave ship, I was in stunned silence. Then I started to worship. I started to pray. Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. Thank you for not forgetting about your people. Thank you for this sign to help us remember who we are. I came right away with my grandbaby Clarissa and her friend Peter. Our babies need to see this.
My name Clarissa, and this my boyfriend Peter.
Hi, everybody. Hi.
I guess I never really thought about slave for this slave ship. Peter, he sometimes be talking about it, but I don't pay him no attention. No, they just nothing about it in school. No, they just about Africa or nothing. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. They know this about Egypt, the pyramids and stuff, right? Yeah, but nothing about Africa. Egypt is in Africa? You mean that people was black?
See, I told you, Clarissa.
Shut up, Peter, dang.
I am a slaveologist from Ghana.
Yeah, that is brilliant. That's brilliant. So we saw a few familiar characters that pop up in Mr. Joy, but it seems like it's a lot of fun and a lot of work to perform all those characters. I'm curious, what drew you to the sort of multi-character solo work?
I was a part of an organization called it's called now the National Speech and Debate Association. I'm actually their spokesperson for 2021, and they have this category called dramatic interpretation. And that's when you take a 10-minute excerpt of a play and you portray all of the characters. And I had an incredible teacher named Florence Kraling, who's now an ancestor, who just worked tireless with me to learn how to interpret these different characters. And there was an antique vanity in our basement, and my mother was reminding me, because she's always encouraged me to rest, and for as performers, there's been an imposed rest, at least in the live performance aspect. And she told me I would be up at 4 a.m. She said it's 5 a.m, in front of this vanity practicing, doing these characters. But what I will also say, I really believe, and I often say that we are spirit at our essence, and that's the space that connects us all, I believe, and science tells us that, right? I talk about us, the reality, if put our hands under microscopes, or vibrating molecules of energy. As a boy, when the challenges with addiction and violence and all those things were happening in my house, my creativity was my safe place. And so I remember I had a little Texas Instrument computer, and as a boy at 10, I would sit and it would feel like something was coming through me. And I would write these speeches like, I think the best, I expect the best, the dream is alive. And I would almost, well, I now know the words would be like channeling, like spirit was moving through. And it's, this is what we all do when we're in a moment of flow, whether you're an intellect writing a paper or, we're artists painting. It's something that we have the ability to connect to something in ourselves and allow what I call spirit, to come through. And similarly with these characters, it's really been a process of listening inside and allowing the character that's there, that this is this expansion of myself to take form. And I find a place of the inner landscape of the character, and then they're there. And I can access the character because I'm finding the truth of the spirit of who the character is. And so it's really been a joy for me, and it's been an opportunity for me to play and to be creative and to talk about ideas and themes that may otherwise be hard to hear, because there's the spectacle and the magic of the transformation that helps carry the message.
Well, you talk about standing in front of that vanity. I can picture you down there, characters channeling these stories, these poems, and which you tend to use throughout all of your work, this poetry aspect. I've heard you talk about it as soul arias. And I wonder if you might be able to speak about that technique, that whether that's the channeling or how you incorporate that. And just to say about the characters, the multi-character solo work is beautiful for you, and a real wonderful challenge and opportunity for other actors who step in and embody this work. But talk a little about the technique of soul arias and how you weave that in throughout the pieces.
Absolutely. I also trained as an opera singer, and I love to sing. And I remember being a kid in Dayton, Ohio, and walking into the library and the videotape section when they had videotapes. And I remember seeing a videotape of this beautiful dark-skinned Black woman in this royal gown, and then these, two white men on either side of her that looked like soldiers. And it was La Forza del Destino by Verdi, and it was Leontine Price. Yeah, and I had began to study singing in the magnet school that I was going to for junior high. And I took it home and I played it, and she would have these moments where she would just pour her heart out, and the passion and the emotion and the magnitude of it was just so moving to me. And of course those were her arias. And as I went further in singing and I learned more about that, it's just a moment of emotion that's so extreme, so profound that it needs its space to be expressed.
Yeah.
And yeah. Yeah. And so that's how I came up with the technique of the soul aria, because as my father also was a poet, and one of the things that he left in the house when he was incarcerated was an anthology called Black Poets. Mm-hmm. He graduated summa cum laude with a degree in English while supporting a $300 a day heroin habit. And this book had his notes, on the sides of it. And so, I realized in this sort of moment of reflection, particularly close to his passing, it's also my way of sort of just reconnecting to him, connecting the spirit. It's got that sort of sermon feel that you get from the Black church too. It's just the passion and the freedom.
Yeah, it's what we call in the opera world a park and bark moment. So
yes, exactly.
You pour your heart out, you just say the thing. And speaking of park and bark, we're going to move now to Mr. Joy. Okay. A piece that's closer to us because we've seen it more recently, and play Deshawn's poem here. And I will just say to the folks listening that it's not often that we get to see Daniel portraying performing Mr. Joy, but we were able to do a live capture with students from Emerson College in the LA campus several months ago, and been able to share that. So we're actually we've seen Tangela, we've seen Deborah, we've seen Adaubrey play this, and not often have we been able to see Daniel. So we're seeing a quick clip of Daniel performing Deshawn's poem in Mr. Joy, and then we'll talk about where we're going. So why don't we take a look at that?
Sure.
All right, Trey. I'll stop asking you to come to church with me. I just wanted you to hear me spit my poem. You want me to spit it for you right now? You mean like out here? All right, bet. Okay. I mean, all right, cool. I'm cool. I'm gonna spit it for you right quick. Okay. The title of this poem is A Black Boy Speaks. You tell me to pull up my pants, pull down my hoodie, and watch the words I speak. The roots of this system are poisoned, and you focusing on a leaf. I understand. Witnessing my breakdown brings tears to your eyes, but I'm crying too. Can you hear me? There are reasons for my demise. Maybe, just maybe, I call my boy my nigga, 'cause we out here living like slaves. And maybe I act so angry, 'cause that's how the forgotten always behaves. These projects are our plantation, and rage at our condition keeps us in chains. Why don't you Harriet Tubman us to freedom instead of shaming us for our pain? Because our underground railroad's been derailed and we stranded without a ride. How am I supposed to be a man with no father as a guide? Most children learn how to behave from what they see their parents do, and a history untold repeats itself. So is some of the blame on you? All of a sudden, just out of nowhere, there's a generation of lost black boys. No, the systematic destruction of a people is loud. It makes noise. Why didn't you hear our screams when hopelessness caught us in its net? They've thrown us in the belly of this ghetto slave ship and told us to forget our hopes, our dreams, any vision of a better life. We've been captured and our middle passage is rife with the stench of poverty, horrific screams of self-doubt. They've chained our hearts and minds. Is it any wonder we can't find our way out? Create a search party. Come find us, 'cause we are desperate to be found. How do we escape to freedom? We agree that we are bound. How do we say no to the Jim Crow of these prisons everywhere? Too many of us are going there, and most folks don't seem to care. How did you organize before to obtain our civil rights? We need a revolution now. Teach us the right way to fight. We've been fighting all our lives. We just weren't given the right tools. Most of us want to learn, but have you seen the state of these so-called schools? A black boy speaks. Will you hear my cry, or you continue to live your lives while day after day we die?
Yeah, well, that is a part of the play that always gets me, and even though I haven't seen the whole thing, it still gets me today. So, but we've seen Mr. Joy, we've seen all the characters and fallen in love with so many of them. And as we look from Emergency to Mr. Joy on to what's next in this last of the trilogy that we're calling right now The Garden. And I would love to hear personally, like, what characters will show up in this next piece, and tell us a little about what you're thinking about for The Garden. And I know we don't have a ton of time and we might have a few questions, but I'm hoping, because this is where we're going with this trilogy, and just curious about what you're thinking about for Mr. Garden. What are the questions that you're grappling with in this last piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So towards the end of Mr. Joy, Peter, who's Clarissa's boyfriend, one of the younger characters, talks about his father's garden. And I guess we probably won't play the clip because we're short on time.
It's only 30 seconds, so we could certainly play. You want to show that now before you chat, or you want to talk a little bit?
You don't have to. It's okay, because he showed some characters, yeah, in case people have questions. He talks about his father planting this garden in the hood, and basically, what's the point? And he says, we're just like nature, and in nature everything changes. A seed becomes a bud, becomes a tree. And so the garden, like a slave ship, we imagine a slave ship rise in front of the Statue of Liberty in the first and the third of the trilogy, in the spot of Mr. Joy's murder. It's now a disheveled site. His son is wanting to build luxury condos. He's going to build Joy residences to honor his father. And the day construction is supposed to begin, a massive tree that seems to be as rooted as far down as one can go and reaches as far into the sky as one can go, rises in the site of Mr. Joy's shoe shop. And it has also been sent by the ancestors. And the goal is to ask us to go back to our roots. What roots us all? What connects us all? And, you know, creation all began in one place. It began in Al-Kebulan, which is the ancestral name for Africa. And it's, a garden is a place where you have to dig up what's the weeds, because they can choke off growth at the root. It's a place, a community garden that the young people are going to try to encourage the community to build. And it's a place of possibility where new things can be planted and where growth is possible. And so this question we're asking is, what do we need to dig up? What really roots us, and where's the possibility for growth and the possibility for us to blossom?
Daniel, you're brilliant. I'm like sitting here like, oh my God, I can't wait. This is going to be so good. It's going to be, well, just to hear you talk about it, I know that it's still very much in development and still in your head. And I know you're still working with David Dower, who directed Mr. Joy, on trying to pull that out. But
yes,
the journey that you've been on personally, the journey that you've taken us on as a community has just, we're so privileged to have encountered your work, to have encountered you. And I am looking forward to the further development of this piece. For those who are listening, our plan is to have some presentation of it in its full, fully produced, whatever that means, if we can afford it, in spring of 2022. And I don't think I'm talking out of turn here to say that there's certainly interest, and more than interest, but a process in play to have the trilogy perhaps aired on TV and through APT. So more to come on that. And again, for us, it's just been incredible to be in your wake as you develop and grow, and the journey becomes richer, and you share your wisdom with us. So I just want to say thank you for who you are, continue to evolve to become, and all that you share with us. And going back to that question at the very beginning, are you okay? It seems to me you are more than okay. You're thriving, and that gives us all such great hope for what's to come. And so thank you for being here. I know we have just a few more minutes. I have some other closing things to share with you, but I want to make sure that I'm making space for any questions, and we'll be brief, or maybe we'll be over just a hair, maybe
I'm
a minute.
fine with that if people have a bit of time, yeah.
If there are any questions, I don't see any coming through my little channel.
Yeah, so we've got one.
Okay.
And I wonder, Earl Phelan, if you want to unmute and ask your question, or I'm happy to ask it for you, but I want to give you the chance to unmute and ask your question.
Just first and foremost, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing. You've inspired me. I'm in education and working with a lot of the children who you were sharing about, and you've gotten me to want to step up my game significantly. So thank you for doing that. I just wanted to ask you, KOA, you talk a lot about spirit, and I just wanted to know what helps you kind of tap into that spirit and channel that spirit, and what are some of the things that have been blockages to you being able to touch that spirit? And again, thank you so much.
Thank you. That's the deep question, and I appreciate it. A dear friend of mine is on the Zoom with us, Jackie Lindsay, who also is a really great partner of ArtsEmerson, as well as, dear friend of mine and partner. And, she described it to me as the spark. We all have this spark within us. And I believe it's the truth. of who we are, right? We are spirit, and we live in a physical world. And the reality is that I believe everything we see is someone's spirit that's been put into physical form, whether it's a house or the work of an artist or a great meal. But because the world is physical and because things happen to us, I think it's easy to forget that. And for me personally, the things that were negative that happened, particularly in my formative years as the brain was forming, really told me some really false ideas about who I am and who I can be. And, you know, when we know science, that literally creates how the brain forms. And so my barriers to spirit are my believing past pain or even current circumstances have to be my story. Those are my barriers to spirit. And what frees me is to remember that regardless of what has happened or even what is happening, everything I see was created because someone was able to tap into the truth of who we all are, tap into spirit and manifest something. And if I can remember that that spark is who I am, that spark is who we all are, and I can create from that versus being limited by the past, then that's what allows me to connect with spirit.
That's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cole. I just want to, full disclosure, Earl is a dear brother and friend of mine, and he's being modest about his education. He runs turnaround schools in 10 different states or something like that. And I think, Earl, we should talk offline because you need the trilogy through all of your schools. So we should talk about moving KOA's work through those various schools across the country. So more offline. I'm doing a little business on this town hall. But anyway, we can talk more about that. Are there other questions that we have? And that was a great one, Earl. So thank you for raising that up.
Yes, we've got one more question from Joan Langcourt. Joan, would you like to unmute?
Yes, hi.
How are you?
Good. And I love your story. I guess if you would care to share, I wondered whether your father ever watched the Knock Knock performance, and if so, what he thought of it.
Yes. My father, the last stint that he did in prison was 8.5 years. And in 2005, Ruby Dee presented me at the National Black Theater Festival in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And he actually came to see me perform there. And his first words to me were, "You did me dirty." Those are his first words. But, you know, he was full of pride and joy that, you know, I had, you know, created the work and that I was being celebrated for it in that way. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Any other I'm sure there are many questions, and I am also mindful of time and want to be respectful of KOA's time. But if there are no other questions at the moment, I will try and wrap us up by offering a few closing remarks and letting you know what's coming up here at ArtsEmerson. So you just hold on, KOA, because I'll give a proper closing with you in just a second. But I just to say, there's in addition to planning for 2022, we are still in this season. And in our digital space, we are running The Return of the Dragon, which had 2 scheduled showings this past weekend and beginning today. It's on demand through April 27th. And there was a great review in the LA Times because we partnered with Red Cat in California on the presentation of it. So if you haven't seen The Return of the Dragon, Guillermo Calderon, our colleague down in Chile, you'll want to check that out. In addition, the next installment of Shared Stories in our film series, which is a presentation collaborating with the Boston Asian American Film Festival, Boston Latino International Film Festival, and Roxbury International Film Festival, takes place next week. We're streaming both Eating Up Easter, followed by the short Sky Islands. And so you'll want to tune into those. And also, many of you know that we have been working with Toshi Reagan for a number of years as our artist in residence here at ArtsEmerson. And a physical wooden book is touring various locations in the Boston area, and we're inviting people to contribute to the creation of the book by adding a page. Helmed by poet, playwright, and activist Letta Neely, the project is called Seed to Harvest, Traces Remain, and you can get more information about how to engage at parablepathboston.com. And then lastly, save the date for our next town hall, which is on May 14th at 5 o'clock. We'll be talking to you soon about what we're going to be talking about at that time. And always, I encourage you to learn about our offerings at artsemerson.org. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that we continue to need your support. So there's always a donate page on all emails that you receive. So we invite you to be as generous as you can as we continue to navigate these very challenging and uncertain times. Finally, huge thanks to Kevin Becerra and Jess for their support during the event on screen, and also for those who are behind the scenes. And a thanks to our ASL interpreter, Jason Gilchrist, and our captioners, Mary Walker and Kate Lure. Sorry, that's Jerron is our, and there he is, our interpreter. And to all the participants, thank you for spending this Friday afternoon. I don't know where you are, but it's beautiful where I am here. And so hopefully you'll be able to get out before the sun goes down. I thank all of you for the time, and a special thanks to KOA. We're so thrilled and so privileged to have you in the ArtsEmerson family, leading us as artists tend to do. And we look forward to our continued work together. The trilogy may be wrapping up, but there's more work, I know, that is coming out of that body. So thank you so much, KOA, for spending this evening and for sharing your story with us. And again, thank you to all who tuned in. We'll be in touch. And if you don't hear from us, be in touch with us. Have a good evening, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.